Now, the next interview we have here is with Lorne Lanning, who's an icon in the video game industry, and we're honored to have him on our show. This interview is actually conducted by Captain Chaos, who's our roving reporter, and this is from the Video Games Live event, and I was there too, and I actually met Lorne, and he was so cool. He's a really, really neat guy, and he's just been around the block, and he really shares some insight into the industry here. So I will have to warn you, though, this is a long interview. It's over a half hour long, and the audio quality, obviously, well, it'll be obvious to you in a minute here, is not that great, but bear with it and give it a listen. I think you'll learn some stuff here. The guy's very cool. So here you go. Here's Lorne Lanning as interviewed by Captain Chaos, our roving reporter.
It's Captain Chaos for Video Game Outsiders, and I am with an industry legend today, Lorne Lanning, one of my favorite game creators, Abe's Odyssey, Abe's Exodus, Munch's Odyssey, and the late lamented Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, which I'm currently playing and I'm absolutely loving. Lorne, why don't you tell us how you started, got into the industry, or where you started, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, it's kind of a twisted story. I thought I was going to be a painter, and I went to school in New York at School of Visual Arts, and I thought I was going to do that, but I was just a kid from Connecticut. I grew up in Meriden, and didn't really know much about entertainment, but once I got into school and started seeing what was happening in film, and it was always a huge influence to see the Star Wars movies, and I always loved Jim Henson stuff, and even Disney, It was great. So once I got there, I started getting more interested in film, and then I saw what was happening in the mid-'80s. I saw what was happening with these companies in California with computer animation. And there was this person that I used to see on the HBO specials and all the time. Her name was Sherry McKenna.
Okay.
And today that person's my partner. But she was a real pioneer in producing visual effects with computer animation way back when. So in '87, I packed my bags and moved out west and went back to school and started working at the same time at CalArts. And I started working at some visual effects companies and also TRW Aerospace, because at the time those were the only people who had 3D computers, and they were really expensive back then. And after TRW, and when I got out of school, I went to work at Rhythm & Hughes, and I started off as a modeler, and then quickly became a technical director, and then shortly after became a lead technical director, and then I became an art director, and then I was a visual effects supervisor by the time I left. And by that time, I had convinced Sherry McKenna, who was also, she was the vice president at Rhythm & Hughes for special projects. I convinced her to start a video game company because I saw that, where video games were going, and I knew that they were all going to start turning 3D. And I wanted to be in on that and wanted to birth some universes because I had some stories I wanted to tell. And then we founded Oddworld in 1994.
Now, what did you work, prior to going on tape, we talked, you actually created a theme park ride?
Well, we did several films for theme parks.
Okay.
My partner had produced the Back to the Future attraction at Universal Studios, and then I had helped design and art direct and visual effects supervise on one called Safari that was right around the same time as computer graphics buffs might sort of remember, but it was right around the time of Jurassic Park, just before Jurassic Park released, and we were doing this attraction for Japan, and it was a simulator film attraction, and directed by this guy Mario Camberg, who's really brilliant, and so people would get inside this submarine that had a glass front, and then it would become a film experience, a lot like Back to the Future.
All right.
So this was I was always really interested in how technology and art converged, and then where the marketplace opportunities were. But at my heart, I was a storyteller, and I was realizing more and more that that's really what I was, and that's in many ways what all artists are.
Right.
And so I wanted to actually start telling stories, but be in control of their destiny as well. And when you worked in Hollywood for visual effects, you have nothing to do with the storytelling process. You're work for hire, and you need to do an effect, and you have no influence over the script, and nor should you. But
make me a 3D dinosaur, and
exactly.
I don't care what you want to do with it.
Yeah,
this is what we're doing with it.
Yeah, right. And that's the way it should be. It's their project; they raise the money. But for me, I wanted to sort of incorporate a lot more Renaissance elements. I wanted to be writing, I wanted to be directing, and dealing with lighting, and creating creature designs, and designing artificial intelligence, and all of these things had a lot of appeal to me. So really, to get the job that I wanted, I had to start a company. Because in many ways, that job didn't really exist, and that was what, 13 years ago now.
And the name of the company is was Oddworld Inhabitants.
Yeah, it is Oddworld Inhabitants. So what we did was in 2005 we redirected our focus towards predominantly computer animated motion pictures and the development of games externally. So we'd be more of a Bruckheimer, where we weren't really the company that had all the production resources, but we were the ones that were putting together our stories, our packages, our designs for games and movies to release simultaneously, because we thought that the future was more exciting in that films and games and the synergy between them had the opportunity to be designed as really unique things at their beginnings. So the film that we're working on now, Citizen Siege, which is our new property that we created, was actually greenlit as a game first. But the gaming industry, wants to retain all the film rights and all that stuff. So we went, nah, and we pulled out of that, and instead went and made the film deal. And now we still retain the game rights. So that may not mean a lot to a lot of listeners, but in essence,
that's how Lucas did it.
That's how Lucas did it.
And he got the lunchbox deal and the Underroots deal.
Yeah. And today, he's worth, I think, about $7 billion. But I think that's an important thing, is that artists play a large role in our economy, and they have more influence over what they do with their money, and hopefully they spend it in good ways.
Well, looking at the industry today, and just the giant conglomerate game publishers, EA, and then looking back at more of the craft shops like Oddworld was back when it was making the games, the quality of the games, the quality of the story is I can't even remember a story in an EA game, really, for that matter. But what was the concept behind Oddworld?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, because for me, it wasn't about making games. It was about making experiences that help sensitize us to issues that we should be aware of. And I remember I did a report in 1983, my first year of college, and I had no interest in doing reports, right? I just wanted to draw and sculpt and do fun stuff. But they were like, no, you have to do a topic. And I said, well, it was supposed to be an oral report, and you had to do homework. I didn't want to do any of that. So the teacher said, you're going to do U.S. intervention in El Salvador. That's your topic. And I was like, oh, Jesus, how boring, huh? So I actually started going and doing what college students are supposed to do, and going to the library and reading. And I started reading all this foreign press. And it was a huge wake-up call, because that was my first insight into how misinformed the American population is. And I was reading European newspapers and, South American and Central American and different viewpoints. And it became very obvious how much our opinions are influenced from a very filtered media, and how untrue a lot of what we're told is. And that made me start to look at a lot of things. And I was always closely connected with the environment. I found peace on the Connecticut River, in Falls River, in Essex, Connecticut. These are places that I loved to be at. And yet at the same time, I saw the pollution impact. I saw what happened when the dams broke. I saw, my favorite lake in Vermont died. All the fish died from acid rain. I was seeing these impacts, but a lot of people weren't really seeming to pay attention. And I was also learning more, going to film school with an international community. I was learning more about the exploitation of third world workers, and really how horrible a lot of that was. And while these things, I don't know why, I don't know what is it about us as individuals, but certain things stick in our craw and make us become passionate about it. And I became passionate about sort of making experiences that would get people interested in other subjects and make them want to make a difference and maybe inspire them. And so I also believe that if you I never had a desire to be a documentary filmmaker, or if you sort of if you beat people over the head with a message, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to hear it. So how do you do it in a way like Star Wars did? Like Star Wars, for example. We were at a point in time when there was a real sort of spiritual deficit in our culture, and people were rejecting established religion, but New Age stuff seemed a little too flaky for people. And then Lucas comes along with this samurai monks in space, and a Yoda, that all of a sudden embodied everything that I believed in a lot of ways, where I wasn't hearing it through traditional channels. And I also, as a little kid, had learned to read from watching Sesame Street. So I believed in this power of media to really help make the world a better place. And yet, in order to get there, sometimes we really need to look at the dark side of things that are going on and at least be aware of it. So it created, Oddworld became this creation of, I wanted to, on a unique place, I wanted to create a universe that would allow me to start off with one of the most exploited third world little schmuck nobodies, who would be off, I always thought of it like off in the Bangladesh shipping yards or something, which is where Abe, it was my association to Abe and Rutger Farms, the meat processing plant, and the disconnect between indigenous cultures, which I think is really, the indigenous cultures hold a lot of the wisdom that is rapidly being lost, that maybe is a lot of the answers to the problems that we have today. And it was a different relationship to the land and nature, and we've kind of been astray from that, in these last few centuries, and it's really creating some problems. So I was like, well, I want to talk about all these things, but I want to have this little guy who starts off just at the absolute bottom of the food chain. And then I want to have him discover what has been lost, and discover what his ancestors knew, and discover a different way of looking at things. And then I want him to follow the trail of consumerism from this little place in the middle of the third world all the way up to like downtown New York, bustling city. And that became the sort of template for the Oddworld quintology, where I wanted to start Abe off at Rutger Farms, but eventually he would build sort of a labor movement. Right. And after he finds out that, his species is the next on the menu, to get chopped up. And then if he could get to the city, ultimately we create something like we had in the 60s, the labor movements and the women's rights and desegregation that was happening. These were important steps, and so I thought it would be really fun to do that in a very quirky, goofy, tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic, humorous way that was non-offensive. And in some regards, I think we succeeded because some of our biggest fans were just some of the people that we know that were just ruthless executives, big financiers and stuff, but they just loved this stuff, And so
he does fart.
There's the whole fart thing. So he does some of that as well.
And that was a message that came very clear through the games. I certainly remember Munch, as I told you earlier. That was the reason I bought the Xbox at launch.
Oh, cool.
I remember all your interviews and what you said the game was going to be, but it was always the story in the Oddworld quintology that drove me. I enjoyed the first one. I think that's probably what stuck with. I remember the co-op gameplay, but I still remember the story. I remember they threw the extra on of the original or Abe's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus, all the CGs streamed together, so anyone could jump in, and I thought that was a fantastic game.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, Stranger's Wrath is not the third chapter, though, correct?
No.
No, that's sort of like that generation's...
what I experienced was that Munch was a really challenging time for us because we had a lot of things were happening. Some of them were at the business level, and then some were at the technology level. And at the technology level, we really kind of got ourselves into trouble, and my ideas were quite a bit ahead of what our technical capacity was, and that's a real dangerous place to be. You can drive yourself right into the ground that way. And actually, a lot of games fail for that reason, meaning that they're too ambitious for what they should have been. And so my ideas for Munch were so big, and I was so enthusiastic about what I wanted, that in the end I only got a fraction of that, into the game. And that's largely, I have no one else to blame, but myself, for not being as realistic as I should have been. And as a result, the whole story got completely changed, because it became a process of what can we save, what can we salvage, rather than what do we want it to be. And that really broke my heart. I get really kind of emotionally wrapped up in these projects. And
well, I remember you were one of Microsoft's biggest proponents when the Xbox came out, saying there's no way this is going to be able to be done on the PS2, etc. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I remember reading all the hype, and I'd say only one thing that disappointed me was the actual game. While a lot of fun, and I did enjoy it, I was expecting so much more. I think it's now kind of Peter Molyneux syndrome, like he did with Fable, where us as the fans were.
Yeah. So you get into, you can get into trouble that way. Something can be overhyped. I think Munch, it's still rated an 8.0, I think, or something, and a lot of people really love the game. But it did get overhyped. It was at the center of controversy because we left the PlayStation and we went on to the Xbox, and we helped promote the Xbox. And Microsoft was not a popular brand. No. So a lot of people didn't like Microsoft. Now, what we cared about was we wanted better tools for the development process, and we wanted smarter systems. And I never liked the PS2 as a tool, and because I think it inherently has some major philosophical flaws. And some major sort of ignorances in terms of what the community needs versus what that configuration is doing. But there's different reasons for that, and none of them of which I feel are really justified. But they come in this, they manifest. And in the end of the day, if we're building tools that make the process more expensive, then we're reducing creativity, and we're putting more money into just doing the same old thing just to get back up and running again, rather than where we should be, in my opinion, is on a much more innovative front. If the tools that people built for the PS2 were carried over and they were allowed to hit the ground running for the PS3, the way that people's tools for the GameCube are hitting the ground running for the Wii, then we would see huge benefits, way better games. The innovation factor could increase dramatically because people wouldn't be reinvesting $5 to $10 million in tool sets just to get back where they were, and pulling out their hair along the way. And they are all pulling their hair out along the way. Whereas I thought that Microsoft was more of the hope, because they understood standards, because they basically monopolized DOS and Windows. But because they understood standards, I thought they would understand the value of retaining a tool set through and having it be more of an evolutionary process. And to some degree that occurred, and to some degree it didn't. The minds that designed the Xbox are not the minds that designed the 360. So you have just the human factor of people want to do things differently. But really, it will come when games are in a place for development where computer graphics has been throughout its history, which is computer graphics, the tools don't revolutionize, they evolve. Whereas in games, the tools have a complete revolution every 5 years, and we don't get to evolve what we have. If you look at Pixar, they're still using code that they were using in the very beginning 20 years ago, and when they were still at Lucas. If you look at PDI, it's the same thing. ILM, it's the same thing. Companies all over the world. Maya was built off of Alias and Wavefront, that was built off of Robert Abel's software from back in the Hollywood early days. So all of that evolved. It didn't get thrown out and then changed. And because of that, we have computer graphics where it is today, which is pretty phenomenal. And games, while games are making a lot of money and there's a lot of games out there, we don't really see the innovation that excites a lot of people, you know. So it's making the gamers happy, but it's not really bringing more people to games, and that's sad because the possibility of games is much greater than the actual manifestation of where we are right now.
Well, as we're said in the panel, there's 1 billion cell phones, and maybe there will be 20,000.
20 million, yeah. Next year, hopefully
20 million. That's right.
20 million consoles are sold.
Consoles.
Yeah.
So where should you be making the games? Probably for the cell phones. Bring the people, get them in there, and then.
Yeah, that's I think for game makers, a lot of opportunity lies in the cell phone, mobile space, because the barrier to entry is a lot smaller and at a lower cost. I mean, people, if you build a $2 million cell phone game, you're nuts. If you build a $2 million console game, you're way underfunded.
Right.
So,
Although with the onset of Xbox Live Arcade and the XNA tools.
Mm-hmm. Those are promising steps in the right direction, for sure.
So at the same time, we're going forward with the technology, but we're also going back to the days of the Commodore 64, where me and a couple of guys can work in our garage and on Xbox Live through XNA.
It's possible. And some people are doing that. There's a new company, Void Star Creations, or Void Star, I'm not sure, but a couple of Oddworld guys are building their Smash Poker, and it's awesome. I mean, when you look at it, it's a rockin' poker game, but it's like visual effects poker, it's really cool. And only two guys in the bedroom, and they are going to bring it to market themselves, and it'll be on Xbox Live, and then they stand to make a lot of money. But if you're going to compete at retail, that day is over. The two guys in a garage are not going to be able to compete at retail.
One of the things you brought up, and I didn't get a chance to ask it at the panel, was you're talking about team creativity and being creative within the team. But in these days of increasing budgets and team sizes over 100 people plus, usually being part of a team, you lose your creativity.
It's a fine balance, it's a difficult thing. I think that individuals that strive for excellence find ways to get more, to gain more confidence from those that employ them, and from their team members. So if someone's really excellent and striving for excellence in what they do, they get more opportunities. Whereas if someone treats it like a job and just does what they're supposed to do almost and no more, then there's not a high appreciation factor. There's not a high appreciation factor from your creative types, But from the other level, it's like then they really are placing themselves as cogs in the wheel. And for a lot of people, that's actually where they should be. And I don't mean to say that in a condescending way. I guess it's unavoidable, but they should be there because the life outside of games is more important to them than the life within games. The people who are really striving for excellence, usually the life outside of games is a mess, But within there, they're just excellent at what they do, And that's the same with science. I mean, Einstein wouldn't even. All his clothes were exactly the same because he didn't want to devote any brain time to changing clothes every day, looking like a fool. So when we have people that really strive for excellence and try to really make a difference in what they do, there's usually some sort of compromise in other areas of their life. Whereas if people want to have a really good, full, rich life, then
make trees.
Yeah, then they're and they're perfectly happy doing that. And there's a lot of space for them to do that, and that can work. But it's true that the more that team sizes grow and the larger productions become, the individual contribution that can really put its signature on something becomes, more hindered, more reduced. And film is a great example of that, because we usually go, who wrote it, who directed it, who produced it, and then beyond that we might think of who acted in it, but but there's a lot of people on that production, hundreds of people. But they almost all of them could have been replaced by someone else. But the writer and the director, to really pull it off, they were irreplaceable. So what happens when we get into endeavors where there's much larger teams and higher budgets is, in order to have more creative freedom, you got to fight your way up to closer to the top of that food chain. But that means, you pay a heavy price for that as well, in time and energy and dedication, and how many dates you canceled, how many dinners you missed with your wife, how many, and those are just par for the course.
Since you were bringing up movies, I just want to make sure that this thing is still working.
Okay.
Workers' comp veteran. I'm used to a tape recorder with about 15 minutes on
right.
each side.
Right.
They don't get technical like this. You're about Citizen Siege. What can you tell me about it?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about it. I can't get much into the story. That's all pretty top secret. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a universe where Oddworld was a very sort of quirky reflection of the world that we live in, the cracked mirror, and it was done with humor. Citizen Siege is much more intense, it's much darker, and it's more relevant to our moments in time today. It takes place in the near future, and it revolves around an expatriate who comes home to the States after fighting in the Middle East to find that everything he was fighting for seems to have faded from the landscape around him. And then it becomes a psychological action thriller, like a political action thriller, really. And it starts getting pretty intense and pretty dark. And one of the things that's exciting about it, the story has to be the most exciting component, because if it's not, you shouldn't even make the movie. But one of the things that's exciting about it is that we're going to do it all in computer animation. And so this is one of the first times in the States that people have been willing to take the bet to take animation to a new level for type of and tone of content, and this is going to be pretty intense. PG-13, because we don't want to make R-rated films, but we don't need to swear and we don't need to have sex on the screen. But that's really exciting because it gives us an opportunity to do something and get it out there and be unique and new and fresh about it. What's also exciting is that we designed the game at the same time that we were putting together the story of the film. And therefore, what's going to happen is we have two really original, uniquely designed experiences, the game and the movie, that are targeted to release at the same time. But they were really designed to share the same world and universe, but to stand on their own and not just rely on the branding of one or the other to help, bring people in, and then you sell them the crappy movie license game. We really want the game to be something special too. So the combination of that, and what's also another component is that because it's all in 3D, this is our chance to also prove on a technology and database front that the digital studio of the future and digital backlot of the future has arrived. And the characters that are in the game and the way that they're built will be the same in the movie, like it's shared. And the visual, visceral quality of everything should be completely consistent in the film and in the game. That's kind of exciting. Then the birth of a new model that we've been passionate about for a long time, but only until recently have had the opportunity to start executing on it.
And if this takes off, we're going back to Oddworld?
Oh, yeah. We really, you had asked about ontology earlier, and what I was saying was because the story got so heavily influenced by the reality of our technical state, it changed the story, and then I didn't want to do that again for the Quintology, because I know where the Quintology is going. And I went, you know what? I don't want to birth these as games first. From here on, I want to birth them as movies first, so that then I have the benchmark of knowing exactly how the game should function. And so we did the Citizen Siege deal first, because your first deal in Hollywood, as a director, and I'll be directing this, you pay a heavy price, and that's just the way it is. Whereas we didn't want to pay that heavy price with the Oddworld universe that we've nurtured for 12 years and 13 years and invested tens of millions of dollars and invested years of our lives in and own lock, stock, and barrel today. So Citizen Siege was a nice way to sort of enter the film reality with a new, exciting CG property and with a new partnership because of John Williams, the film producer who produced the Shrek movies. Okay. He's the producer on the project. He's our partner. And so it was a way to kind of allow us some other creative thinking on some different type of material, and give Oddworld a break for a little while, and then come back to it hopefully and just knock it out of the park. And I'm really passionate about Oddworld, so it's not going to go away. But to take things to higher, newer levels, you really need some long-term strategic thinking on how to pull that off. And I think we're doing a pretty good job.
You're also the voice of Abe, right?
Yeah. I did the voices for most of the characters.
Did you?
Yeah. There's Stranger, a lot of them. I tried to encourage more people in the company because the guy that really inspired me on that front was Jim Henson, and his philosophy was if you're going to control the puppet, you're going to have to do the voice too. So to him, essentially an animator was someone who operated the puppet and made it talk. And then we got some great timeless voices that were real caricatures, and I wanted to institute that at Oddworld, but in the beginning, there's something about once you put a microphone in front of someone that they sort of freeze up. It's like a camera, and but for me, the voices, I could start doing the voices in a sound booth, and they were almost done. As soon as I was done, everything else I'd be working on for years. You design it, and it goes through all these iterations. But doing voices for the characters, I did Abe and Munch and Stranger, and then the Sligs and the Gluckins and the Chickens and
the Clacks,
the Clackers. Yeah, and Michael Bross, who was our audio guy, he did all the audio work for Stranger. He did a lot of the voices in Stranger as well. A lot of the Clackers and a lot of the Outlaws. I did the
Outlaws. Some great lines in that. I'm sitting there just, and I have it in 5.1, and it seems to be it was recorded in 5.1, right?
Well, it's actually being processed in 5.1 in real time.
Okay.
So things are spatially where they should be.
And I can't even see the guy, but you hear him say, swearing about this or that, or it was like.
We really want to do. I think we did over 10,000 voice clips in Stranger's Wrath.
Wow.
And one of the things we wanted to do was just really encourage the gamer to talk to all the characters and talk to them more than once, And we tried to load it as best as we could, with funny lines and humorous things, and because we felt that games should be more funny. That they should not only have a great wow and challenge factor, but they should also be, have an entertainment factor. And comedy, is the quickest way to anyone's heart.
So comedy's tough in gaming. It hasn't been. The successes are rare. Your games, Earthworm Jim.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
I mean, that came up a lot today. Skull Monkeys.
Yeah. What's his name? From ILM, the designer. Oh, he's a friend of mine. I'm drinking these artificial sweeteners. I think are making my memory go. What's his name? He did Monkey Island. He did.
Not Tim Schafer?
Yeah, Tim Schafer.
All right.
I'm sorry, Tim. The name is slipping me because I'm doing a brain dump. But Tim Schafer's games were hilarious.
Yes. Well, you and him were part of the god awful Microsoft purge when both Psychonauts and Munches, or Stranger's Wrath got axed. And
well, they were. Ed Freeze at Microsoft was a big believer in that the casual market was going to be Xbox's prime market. Now, I don't think he was able to control the pricing of the box, which ultimately dictated its fate. But he really, and going to the creatives in the industry and encouraging them to bring out the best on his box. Well, when he left, the new management, had a very different vision, and it was really about, I think, following the market rather than pioneering the market, and that's okay. I mean, whatever works for whoever is responsible. But so they decided to focus totally on the hardcore gamer. And so the games that were more casual gamer-oriented, Psychonauts, Stranger's Wrath, they were looking for ways out of. So, and, we understood, and they were honest with us about that. So we, together, we looked for another relationship to get it out there, and we went to EA. But, in hindsight, it wasn't a great move, but it was what it was. And we were able to get the game finished. The game, it got a lot of praise. I mean, critically, people love the game.
Yeah, like I told you earlier, I checked game rankings this morning, and it came out with an 87%, probably like 50, 60 different magazines.
Yeah.
Which is pretty high.
Well, it's funny because it's one of those games where so many people go, why?
Yeah.
Why didn't it sell? And I said, well, it's very simple. You can't sell what you don't promote today. Yeah. And that was a business decision that EA made, and that's what happens. If you have a game that you think you can sell, this is what people don't understand, and even the game press sometimes amazes me with their sort of ignorance of this, which is when we're expecting a big game to come out, the marketing budget for that is huge. Mm-hmm. Well, even though we know it's a great game, we know why are they doing that? Because they need to. They need to market that game to really do the numbers. Now, when you have a game and you don't market it, it could be Halo, it's not going to sell. Because the retailers will take that game off the shelf in 2 weeks. Right? And if that doesn't, so 10 years ago, you could come out with a game like Tomb Raider. Mm-hmm. And that's a great example. Tomb Raider, I remember seeing a couple little articles on it before it came out. Then after it came out, all of a sudden it started slowly getting traction. Then it started getting on magazine covers. Then all of a sudden it became the big phenomenon, right? But no one, the people at Eidos didn't think it was going to be a big phenomenon. It did not have a huge marketing launch. It started to take off. And we were in a retail climate where the retailers, it wasn't as pressing as it was today. It wasn't as demanding as it is today. And with the press, they were saying, oh, hey, this is a great game that's out. Let's put it on the cover. Well, that doesn't happen anymore today. The covers are all booked before the games are released. That's a strategic part of the marketing. And as a result, very rarely, if we do not hear or see about great games that are released if they did not get promoted. Unless a game gets released and the publisher goes, well, maybe we didn't do good on the launch, but this is a great game and we believe in it, so we're going to start fueling it. We're going to keep it alive.
Prince of Persia is
so when they do that, then you'll eventually hear about it. But without that support, then they just get swept off the shelf and tossed back. So that's what happened with Stranger. It's just they pulled out the support. And in some ways, I'm really kind of thankful that happened, because it made our decisions very easy to make. That we weren't necessarily achieving what we wanted to achieve, and the business had changed so much that we decided it was time for us to change, rather than be on a treadmill that really isn't a lot of fun. And why are we doing it if it's not fun? And rather than selling and just sticking cash in your pocket, but working for philosophies that you don't agree with. We've been fortunate enough where we could make the decision that we made, which is let's redirect the company. It's going to take a couple of years. Let's let people say whatever they're going to say. If they think whatever they think, it doesn't matter. We're going to go here, and when we achieve what we're at the next step, history will be more clear and more easily understood. And you got to be brave at times to take some risks, to really go out there in areas that people aren't necessarily treading. And anytime you do that, there's a high probability that you're going to fail, but you have to stay focused and try and pull it off.
It's hard to work 80 hours a week for something you hate.
Yeah, exactly.
80 hours a week on something you love, that works.
It's doable. Even that's hard.
But
yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you for your time, and I look forward to Citizen Siege.
Siege.
Siege. Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, pleasure.